There are some questions about famous people that never really disappear. They remain in the public conversation for years because, behind the headlines, there is something deeply human at the center of them. One of those questions is this: why didn't Hillary Clinton leave Bill Clinton after the scandals that shook their marriage and changed the way the world looked at both of them? To understand that question, we have to move beyond gossip, political arguments, and simple judgments. We have to look at Hillary Clinton not just as a former First Lady, Senator, Secretary of State, or presidential candidate, but as a person who made decisions inside an extremely complicated marriage under extraordinary public pressure. And perhaps the most important thing to remember is that none of us knows everything that happened inside their private relationship. What we know comes from public statements, biographies, interviews, historical records, and the events that unfolded in front of the world. But what we don't know is what happened behind closed doors. And that distinction matters. When the Monica Lewinsky scandal became public in the late 1990s, the Clinton marriage was placed under an almost unimaginable microscope. Bill Clinton was the President of the United States. Hillary Clinton was the First Lady. Their marriage was no longer simply a private relationship between two people. Millions of people were watching, judging, criticizing, speculating, and demanding explanations. For Hillary, the situation was not simply about discovering that her husband had been unfaithful. It was also about politics, power, children, reputation, family, ambition, and an entire political world that was constantly watching her every move. Imagine being in a relationship where every personal decision could become tomorrow's newspaper headline. Imagine trying to decide whether your marriage should continue while knowing that your decision could affect your children, your career, your political future, and perhaps even the history of your country. That is the environment in which Hillary Clinton made her decisions. And that is why the simple question, why didn't she leave, may actually be the wrong question. A better question might be, what did staying mean to Hillary Clinton? Because staying does not necessarily mean weakness. Leaving does not necessarily mean strength. And marriage is rarely as simple as outsiders imagine. Hillary and Bill Clinton had known each other for years before they entered the White House. Their relationship had already survived disagreements, political pressure, professional challenges, and the demands of public life. They were not strangers who suddenly found themselves in a marriage crisis. They had built a life together. They had a daughter. They had shared political dreams. They had experienced victories and defeats. And they had both invested enormous parts of their lives in the relationship. That history matters. When people look at a marriage from the outside, they often see one event and think they understand everything. But the people inside the marriage see the entire story. They remember the beginning. They remember the good years. They remember sacrifices. They remember moments that nobody else witnessed. They know the personality of the person they married in a way that no journalist, television commentator, or stranger on the internet ever could. That doesn't excuse betrayal. It doesn't erase pain, but it helps explain why personal decisions are rarely as simple as they appear from a distance. Another major factor was Hillary's own personality. Throughout her public life, she has often been described as exceptionally determined, disciplined, ambitious, and resilient. Whether people admired her or criticized her, one thing was difficult to deny. Hillary Clinton rarely allowed other people to define her future for her. That characteristic became especially important during the Clinton scandals. She faced enormous pressure to respond in a particular way. Some people expected her to leave. Others expected her to defend her husband. Others wanted her to attack him. And many people simply wanted to see what she would do. But ultimately, the decision belonged to her. And that is one of the most important lessons in this entire story. A person's private relationship should not automatically be turned into a public referendum. Hillary also had to consider her daughter, Chelsea. For parents, marriage decisions can become incredibly complicated when children are involved. A parent may think about emotional stability, family relationships, school, privacy, and the long-term consequences of separation. That doesn't mean every parent should stay in a troubled marriage. It means that parents often have more factors to consider than outsiders can see. And there was another reality. Hillary Clinton's life was deeply connected to politics. Bill Clinton's presidency was not simply a job. It was a historic political project that had consumed years of their lives. The Clinton family had spent decades building political relationships and public influence. When the scandal exploded, Hillary wasn't standing outside that world. She was inside it. Her own identity and career were connected to public service. She had already been an important political figure in her own right. So the question wasn't simply, do I love my husband? It was also connected to questions such as, what happens to my family? What happens to my daughter? What happens to my own future? What kind of person do I want to become after this? What do I believe about forgiveness? What do I want my life to look like? Those are questions that cannot be answered by a headline. And there is something else people sometimes forget. Hillary Clinton publicly acknowledged that the marriage had serious problems and that she experienced anger and pain. She did not present the situation as though nothing had happened. Instead, over time, she described the decision to continue the marriage as something personal and complicated. That is significant. Because staying doesn't mean pretending the betrayal never happened. Sometimes staying means deciding that the relationship, despite its damage, still has enough meaning to rebuild. Sometimes it means forgiveness. Sometimes it means accepting that another human being is flawed. Sometimes it means deciding that your shared history still matters. And sometimes, frankly, people stay because they make a calculation that outsiders may never fully understand. The truth is that every long-term relationship contains private realities. There are marriages where two people remain together despite serious problems. There are marriages where people separate after decades. There are marriages that look perfect from the outside and are miserable behind closed doors. And there are marriages that survive enormous difficulties because two people decide that they still want to be together. We cannot know the emotional equation inside someone else's marriage. What we can do is examine the choices that were visible. Hillary Clinton chose to remain married. She also chose to continue building her own career. And that second part is particularly important. Hillary did not disappear into Bill Clinton's shadow. After leaving the White House, she became a United States Senator from New York. She later became Secretary of State. She became the Democratic nominee for president in 2016. She continued to create an identity that was larger than her role as Bill Clinton's wife. That tells us something about how she approached her life. She may have decided that her marriage was one part of her identity, but it was not the entirety of her identity. And perhaps that is one reason the question remains so interesting. People often assume that if a woman stays with an unfaithful husband, she must have surrendered her independence. But Hillary's later career makes that conclusion much harder to defend. She continued pursuing goals of her own. She continued making decisions. She continued appearing in public. She continued competing in one of the most demanding political environments in the world, so perhaps staying was not the opposite of independence. Perhaps for her, independence meant having the freedom to decide what she wanted to do with her marriage without allowing public opinion to dictate the answer. Think about that for a moment. Millions of people can tell you what they think you should do, but only you have to live with the consequences. That is true for marriage, it is true for family, it is true for career, and it is true for life. The Clinton marriage also raises an uncomfortable question about forgiveness. Can a relationship survive betrayal? The answer is yes, sometimes. But survival does not mean forgetting. Forgiveness does not necessarily mean saying that what happened was acceptable. It can mean making a conscious decision not to allow one painful chapter to control the rest of your life. For some people, that decision is impossible. For others, it is necessary. Neither choice is automatically right for everyone. This is why judging Hillary Clinton solely through the question of why didn't she leave can be unfair. Maybe she didn't leave because she still loved Bill. Maybe she didn't leave because she believed the marriage could survive. Maybe she didn't leave because of their family. Maybe she didn't leave because she wanted to protect her daughter from a public family breakup. Maybe she didn't leave because she had already decided that her husband's mistakes would not determine the direction of her own life. Maybe it was a combination of all of these things. Or maybe the complete answer is something only Hillary and Bill themselves know. And perhaps we should be comfortable with that. There is another important dimension: power. The Clintons were operating at the highest levels of American politics. Personal scandals can become political weapons. Every statement can be analyzed. Every facial expression can become television content. Every family decision can become a campaign issue. In that environment, a private marriage crisis becomes something much bigger. Hillary had to navigate not only her emotions, but also the political consequences of every possible decision. If she left, some people might have praised her independence. Others might have accused her of destroying her family. If she stayed, some people called her weak. Others admired her loyalty. In other words, there was almost no decision she could make that would satisfy everyone. And that is another lesson. When you live publicly, people will judge you regardless of what you do. So eventually, you have to decide whose opinion matters most. Hillary Clinton made her choice. She stayed, and she continued moving forward. Years later, the Clinton marriage remains a subject of fascination, partly because it challenges our expectations. We often want stories to have simple endings. Good person leaves bad person, marriage ends, justice is done, everyone moves on. But real life doesn't always work like a movie. Real life is messy. People make mistakes. People hurt each other. People forgive. People don't forgive. People change. People stay. People leave. And sometimes we never get the complete explanation. That's what makes the Clinton story so human. Hillary Clinton wasn't simply the wife of a president dealing with a scandal. She was a person trying to decide what to do with her life while the entire world watched. And whatever someone thinks about her politics, that personal challenge deserves to be understood with some degree of empathy. It is easy to judge someone else's decision when we don't have to live with the consequences. But imagine being the person whose decision becomes an international story. Imagine waking up and knowing millions of strangers are discussing your marriage. Imagine having your personal pain analyzed on television. Imagine your child's family life becoming part of political commentary. That is a burden most people will never experience. And maybe the greatest lesson isn't about Hillary Clinton at all. Maybe it's about how we judge other people's relationships. We often see one photograph, one headline, one scandal, one interview, and then we think we know the whole story. But a relationship is thousands of conversations, memories, disappointments, hopes, arguments, compromises, and private moments. No outsider can fully see all of them. So when someone asks, why didn't Hillary Clinton leave Bill Clinton? The most honest answer is probably this: because she had her own reasons. Because she believed staying was the decision she wanted to make. Because marriage is personal. Because people are complicated. And because only the people inside a relationship truly understand everything that holds it together. What we can say with confidence is that Hillary Clinton did not allow the scandal to end her public life. She continued. She rebuilt. She worked. She ran for office. She became one of the most recognizable women in American political history. And that is perhaps the most interesting part of the story. The scandal could have become the final chapter. Instead, she made it one chapter in a much larger story. And whether you admire Hillary Clinton or strongly disagree with her, there is something worth thinking about here. Life does not always give us clean choices. Sometimes we have to make decisions with incomplete information. Sometimes we have to choose between two painful options. Sometimes forgiveness is complicated. Sometimes strength looks like walking away, and sometimes strength looks like staying and rebuilding. The important thing is not that everyone makes the same choice. The important thing is that people understand that the choice belongs to the person living the life. So perhaps the real question isn't, why didn't Hillary Clinton leave Bill Clinton? Perhaps the better question is, how did she continue building her own identity after one of the most humiliating political scandals in modern American history? And the answer to that question is much more interesting. She continued to work. She continued to pursue political power. She continued to define herself. She continued to make choices, and she refused to let one scandal become the entire story of her life. That is a story about resilience. It is a story about complicated relationships, and most importantly, it is a reminder that behind every famous name is a human being making decisions that outsiders can never completely understand. If you found this story interesting, don't just keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who enjoys history, politics, psychology, and the hidden human stories behind famous public figures. And if you want more videos that go beyond the headlines and explore the real human stories behind powerful people, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the most interesting part of history isn't what happened in public. It's the decisions people made when nobody else could see what was happening inside.